Any of you roller coaster fans, by chance, show of hands? Any of you like the thrill rides? Okay, fantastic. And then, just so that I know who I am talking to, are there any people here who are like never roller coaster people? Like you? Okay, great, fantastic. Okay, so here's the thing. When I was a kid, I absolutely loved roller coasters. And granted, the height requirement took me a little bit longer than others to overcome so I could ride. I remember I was probably in 5th grade still watching oversized 7-year-olds get to ride before me, you know. But once I could measure up to that line, I loved it. Give me the highest drops and the turns and the loops, the rides that go backwards, all the speed. I would ride in the front row or in the very back row for the G's, and I would do it all. I'd just pretty much go like, no matter what the ride was, I was like, hands up, let's go. So that was me. And I remember that there was this one fall evening, I'm maybe 12 years old, and I was down at Six Flags Magic Mountain with my SoCal cousins. And so it was getting near to the end of the night where if you guys have ever been to an amusement park and you stick around long enough, all the crowds clear out, right? So the wait times all go down. And so it is me and my SoCal cousins, and we were just going roller coaster to roller coaster, riding everything. And we don't have any adults around, so it's just us like teens and preteens. And so we get off this one roller coaster, we head to this other big one. And as we go, we see that the path in front of us has this like fog on it. And we see that there's these eerie lights blinking, and they have this spooky music is being piped in. And then I remember the water fountains were all dyed like blood red. And we're like, what is this? And so my older cousin, the oldest cousin who was with us, my coolest SoCal cousin, her name was Jasmine. And Jasmine's like, oh, this must be a fright night. And we younger kids are like, what's a fright night? She said, well, you know, around the Halloween season, they do this thing where like they have these people dressed up and, you know, in costumes and stuff like that. And she goes, yeah, it's probably too scary. She says, we should probably go around, but it would take us longer. And here's the other thing, that the ride we want to go on is just on the other side of this. And she's like, you know, it's all made up anyways, right? So like, why don't we just go through? And all of us younger cousins were like, I ain't scared of nothing, you know? Like, I ain't scared of these roller coasters. I'm not scared of no clowns or anything. So we're like, yeah, let's go. So I remember we huddle around, this little cluster of cousins. We huddle around cool cousin Jasmine, and we step into the fog. And at first we're doing all right because we're sort of like together. So we're like, like that's not that realistic. Like, And then we step a little further, and then things begin to get a little more realistic. And we were doing okay still until this one guy in a hockey mask comes up behind us, and he taps Cousin Jasmine on the shoulder. And Cousin Jasmine must have watched the wrong movie because she turns, screams, and takes off into the fog, leaving all of us younger cousins with Jason. And we're like, oh my gosh. So I remember we start booking in, you're seeing all this stuff, and I remember the youngest cousins are crying and everything. We get out of that. Now here's the thing, most of us, after a lot of therapy, we're mostly normal today, so it's not a big deal. But I bring up this story this morning and in this season because what I learned is that you do not want to let your fears or the Halloween season catch you off guard. Which is why throughout the month of October, we will be starting a new series on the ghost stories of the Bible, where each week we're going to be taking one of the Bible's different spooky tales that feature characters like witches and ghosts and sorcerers and skeletons and all this different stuff, zombies, and we're going to be kind of talking about some of these things that come from the Bible. Because as our neighbors begin to decorate for the Halloween season, I don't know where you live, but if it's anything like my neighborhood, you're starting to see some houses getting makeovers, right, in the front yards and things like that. Let's just note that in this season of Halloween, we see stuff ranging from like super cute, like fall decor, to like some truly terrifying, evil type of stuff, right? And just like there is diversity in this room on a lot of things, we got never roller coaster people and roller coaster fans. So I know that even in this room this morning and then beyond it with the different cultures and families we come from, that there are different sort of takes on this season. Some of us have grown up, we're like, don't mess with that stuff because it represents some dark things, and our faith like leads us to be aware of that, and I think that's fair and healthy. And others of us, like, you're into horror films, and you're like that genre, and you've grown up with that, and like some artsy, like, you're like Nosferatu or Frankenstein, whatever that is, and that's kind of where you're coming from. And a lot of others of us are just like, look, I just like to get like a big old pillowcase and go out there and dress up and get as much candy as I possibly could, and it's not all that deep to me, Pastor. here's the thing that I want us to be mindful of. Understanding that we come from these different places, what I would commend to all of us, wherever it is that you're coming from, is that I would encourage us as a church not to duck and run for cover from this cultural season, or to just go along with celebrating every part of it, because there are some really suspect things that we need to be cautious about. But what I'd invite all of us to do is rather to explore reliable principles that come to us from God's word so that you can engage your world and wherever it is that you are coming from with his light, and that we can speak into our culture today. So that's what we are going to be doing this month. And this morning, our story begins just after Jesus has performed one of his most famous miracles in the feeding of the 5,000, where Mark's biography of Jesus tells us that Jesus has taken the ancient equivalent of a child's Lunchable and proceeded to feed essentially the entire Dinuba Unified School District. Every K-12 teacher, student, cafeteria worker, janitor, admin, everybody with leftovers to spare. So that is the day that has been. And now we come to nightfall. And as we do, I just want to point something out that you've seen in the mess of us moving around. I thank Dennis, I thank Kim, I thank others for doing this. When we get ready on a Sunday morning, we trust God's word enough to believe that there is something for you. And so when things come up, we say, look, not everything's in our control, but if it's in my control that we can get a word out to somebody who's here for the first time or the first time in a while or just needs something, we say that's important to us. And so we don't mind our mess. We'll do whatever it takes so that we can get the best word out there that we can. Amen? So that's what we're going to do. Here is where our story picks up. We pick up the scene in Mark chapter 6, verse 45. Immediately after this miracle lunch, Jesus made his disciples to get into the boat and to go before him to the other side to Bethsaida, while he himself dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he, being Jesus, went up on a mountain to pray. So the setting for our story is a lake. And from ancient times to our time, often large bodies of water have just so happened to be places that ghost stories tend to spring up. From the legend of the Flying Dutchman's ship that is often reported to be seen before a shipwreck, to the haunting cries of La Llorona, to this sort of Japanese myth of these fabled funayure that appear as ghosts in the water attempting to sink passing ships. As I understand it, sometimes I guess in the Japanese culture, you get a ghost out there and he's like ladling water into your ship when you're not looking. You're like, no, the ghost. And so we have all of these stories. And then in 2016, we clearly haven't grown out of it, because in 2016, this guy on Lake Superior made the national news when he posted this picture of a mysterious thing out on the water, and is it a ghost ship? Here's the point. The point is that from ancient times to contemporary times, often large bodies of water are associated in the human imagination as this sort of realm between the living and the dead. And Jesus has just sent his followers on an expedition into such a place. Mark continues in your Bibles. And when evening or nightfall came, the boat was out on the sea, and Jesus was alone on the land. And Jesus saw that they were making headway painfully. Other translations say Jesus saw that they were in serious trouble, or that they were straining at the oars, for the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, aka 3 a.m., our time, Jesus came to them. Now, here's the first curious detail of this story. Relying on my friend, Dr. Tim Gettert, in the original Greek language that the story is translated from, it is very clear that a whole night passes after Jesus knows that his disciples are struggling, but before he chooses to come to them. In other words, Jesus looks out. He sees that they are struggling. He sees the storm that they are caught in. He knows that they're tired. After all, they just catered an impromptu meal for 5,000 on his bidding. So he knows where they're at, but he does not rush to their aid, but continues on in prayer. Now, I think we need to be very honest. This is peculiar behavior. If one of our friends did this to us, they see us struggling, they see us and they choose to continue doing what they're doing and not to come to our aid, we'd say, that person's kind of a jerk, right? What are you doing? You're supposed to. And we think even more so, we have this mentality with Jesus. Jesus, if you see us struggling, you are supposed to intervene, right? especially because the disciples are in the boat doing what Jesus told them to do and going where he told them to go. So this is how we think. God, I did what you wanted. I showed up to church, so where's my breakthrough? I gave some cash to the church, so where's my kickback so that I can pay my rent? I prayed for my child, why haven't they come home? I forgave that person at work, and they're still like a jerk. Like, God, I did what you wanted. I went where you told me to go, and my life is seeming to be a struggle because I'm going where you sent me. Parents, have you ever seen your child struggling with something? Maybe your child's really young and they're getting dressed in the morning, right? And they're trying to get that, that shirt on over their heads. Or maybe they're struggling to share out on the playground. They're in a dispute with another kid out on the playground. Or maybe they're struggling with a homework packet. And what usually happens when we see our kids struggling as loving people, what do we want to do? We want to intervene, right? We want to go to them and fix it. We want to do that. But then there's this other part of us that also from a place of love reminds us, hold on, wait. This is one that they can handle. Maybe not only can they handle this, but maybe they need to handle this in order to get a little development, a little experience. And so we lovingly choose to be present without going directly there. Well, a very ancient writer, Origen, far beyond and before anything like gentle parenting, suggests this of the strange text. Quote, "The Savior thus compelled the disciples to enter into the boat of testing and to go before him to the other side, so to learn victoriously to pass through difficulties." Now, is this what's exactly happening in the text? I'm not sure, but for literally thousands of years, people have been trying to figure this out. What is Jesus doing here? Where's his mind at? We don't know exactly what is happening, but it leads us to ask this. In my struggle, in my difficulty, is it possible that Jesus has something for me to learn in it? It just makes us, now I want to be very clear, and this is not in my notes, but I want to be clear. There are times that there is something bad in your life that is difficult because things are wrong and you need to get rid, like it doesn't excuse all the bad things. But it means sometimes things are just difficult and we have to ask, we have to discern, we have to say, God, why am I here? And if I'm trying to do what you've called me to do and what I feel, I'm going in the direction you've called me to go and it's difficult, we ask God, what do you want me to see here? What do you want me to hear here? What do you want me to learn here? Even as we go through it. Now this is where the story gets really weird. Mark tells us that Jesus not only came to them, but he came to them walking on the sea, which is very strange, in part because in one of the oldest parts of the Bible, potentially the part of the Bible that was the oldest, first written down, there's this verse from the book of Job that says this: "He alone, being God, stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea." So only God does that, and here comes this guy Jesus doing just that. So it's pretty funny, too, the way that Mark tells the story, and I love this part, because it seems that Jesus actually gains on his disciples very quickly. Remember that the wind is against them. They have been struggling for hours and hours at this point. They are struggling and straining, and along comes Jesus striding on the very waves that they are battling. A wonderful writer named Morna Hooker puts it plainly when she writes this, quote, "The wind does not prove the same hindrance to him, for he is able to walk faster than they can row." I love this quote, because the same dynamic that we observe in the text is true in our world. Here's the thing, friend, what if I told you that things that are a massive hindrance to me and you are not the same hindrance to Jesus? That there are some things that we come up against that we just cannot get through it. Our effort, our straining, our resource, we're not going to get through it, and yet Jesus overcomes it. There are many things in this world that the Bible would say, there are many things where we are stuck, but Jesus is free. There are many things where we are struggling, but Jesus is striding. There are many things that are hard for us, but that are light work for him. See, the Bible does not apologize in declaring that Jesus is not only a great teacher or a great man amongst men, but that Jesus has something about him that is special, that is divine. That Jesus is the hero of the story, not just this one story in the Bible, but the whole Bible. And not just the whole Bible, but I would submit that Jesus is the story of, or the hero of stories like, for example, my story. And many people's in this room's stories. That we've encountered Jesus able to do things that we could not do on our own, despite all of our efforts, and yet Jesus is able to do them. And so he's able to lead us to places that we could not go on our own. And this is part of the good news of the Bible. So if you have ever felt like you were making extraordinarily slow progress in your life, or your marriage, or your parenting, or your career, or your sobriety, or your degree, remember that our hope that we have when we get close to Jesus is that we have hope in one who is able to do more than we could ever do, more than we could ever ask or imagine. Or my hope is not just in my ability when I follow God, my hope is in one that is better and higher than I am. So we see this interesting dynamic happening, and this is my favorite part. I'm just going to tell you my favorite part of the sermon is going to be this part right here. Because on a Sunday gathering like this, I just want to let you know that for thousands of years, people have often drawn a comparison between the boat in the story and the church in our world. Meaning this is exactly what's happened. This is hilarious to me. For thousands of years, Christians in Bible studies have read this story and been like, hey, you know what this slow-moving vessel full of people who are like stuck and can seemingly make no progress whatsoever and are caught in this storm and are scared in this circumstance, you know what they remind me of? My church on Sunday mornings. And I don't mean this just against our church. I mean, I've been on staff at 7 churches. I've worked with many of you in this room at different churches than this one. And at each of those churches, there have been different seasons, weeks, months, that we have felt like the disciples in this boat. God, we're trying to go in the direction that you've led us in, and yet we're struggling. We're stuck. We're tired. We're scared. God, we went in the direction that you told us to. We tried to reach out to our neighbors, the people who were different than us. We tried to pull off this event, and we weren't sure if we'd have enough help. God, we're trying to give generously, but is anyone else in the room going to give generously to this too? God, I'm trying to go where you sent me to go, and it feels like a struggle. Often, our experience on Sunday morning sitting in these pews is as people that are rowing and straining, and it seems like we're in trouble. We're saying, Jesus, where are you? So what do we do with this reality? Well, let's continue our reading in the story today. Okay. This is the shock of the morning from the text itself. Readers beware as we return to verse 48. And about the 4th watch of the night, aka 3 a.m., Jesus came to them, walking on the sea as only God could do, and he meant to pass by them. Wait, what? To go to them, right? No. He's going to them, intending to pass by them. Well, let's check that in other translations. Check the old King James. He cometh unto them, walking upon the sea, and would have passed them by. All right, well, what about a more contemporary English translation? He intended to go past them. Or in Spanish, iba a pasarlos. What the text says is clear. Jesus intends not to rescue them, but to go past them. So what in the world is happening? Here's the part that we try and figure out, what is Jesus up to? Now, we're not entirely sure, but there is another much older part of the Bible where there's a very famous episode. Stay with me on this one. You guys can get this. You don't have to read the book, but you got to listen to these 45 seconds. In the story of deliverance, where God takes his people who are slaves and he brings them out of slavery and into a better place, there is this very famous deliverance figure by the name of Moses, okay? And there's this one scene, this comes in the book of Exodus, chapter 33, where God and Moses are having a heart-to-heart because they are both, God and the human leader, frustrated with the people. Because they're saying, God, like, Moses is saying, God, you freed all these people and now you're bringing them to the promised land, but all along the way they're grumbling and complaining. All along the way they're not being loyal to you. And so God and Moses are having this heart-to-heart and they're both frustrated. And Moses says, look, God, here's the thing. If you want me to keep going in the direction that you've told me to go, I need to know that you are with me. So God, I need a face-to-face meeting with you. I can't just do a voicemail or an email. God, I need a face-to-face conversation with you. And here's what God says. God says, look, Moses, I hear you. But here's the thing. If me and you had a face-to-face, here's what you have to remember. I am God and you are man. I am a creator, you are the creation. You cannot handle a face-to-face conversation with me. But God says, here's the deal. He says, you know in the way that I directed you to go, you know there's that big rock over there? And Moses is like, yeah, that one? God said, yeah. God says, go over to that rock because there's this big crack in that rock, and I want you to wedge your body in there. And then God says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go past that rock. My glory and my presence are going to go past that rock. I'm going to pass by you. And God says, don't look at me coming because you're going to see my face. You can't handle it. You're going to be overwhelmed. But God says, feel me go past you to let you know that I am with you and I am going ahead of you and I am for you. And he says, as I go past you, you can even look at my back. And that's all you can handle. So Moses goes into the crack and God's glory goes past him. He gets this very powerful experience that God is with him, that God is going ahead of him. And it gives him courage to continue leading these difficult people. So, again, we don't know. I don't pretend that we do. But what some of the best scholars in the Bible see in this passage is that it is possible that when Jesus is passing by his disciples, he may be intending a similar effect. To say, look, I'm here present and I'm going ahead of you. I told you to go in this direction and I'm going to go ahead of you to that place. See, friends, here would be my main point for the morning. It would be this. Sometimes in our trials, Jesus shows up not to rescue us from our storm, but to remind us who he is in our struggle. I'll say it again. This is the part where you take a picture of this. Because you're going to go into a storm this week. You're going to get a trial this week. Sometimes Jesus doesn't show up to rescue us, but to remind us who he is, that he's present with us. So let's see how that goes over with the disciples. But before we do, I'll talk about this. Anybody have kids in sports right now? Or music? Anybody in music? Okay. So we're doing soccer season right now. And here's the thing about being present. If you've ever supported a kid or somebody at their thing, right? They're a theater performance, you're sitting in the stands, or soccer, you're on the sidelines. Often if you are a good supporter, what do? You try and pick a spot where you can sit and you can let them see you. Yes? You want to be in their sight line on the sidelines, right? To let them know that you're here. Now here's the deal. Let's say you go to a school play and you're trying to support that kid. Are you there with cue cards showing them their lines from the crowd? Probably not. When you go to support your kid when they are playing in their different sport, does your presence there change the score? Probably not. So here's the thing. When I go to my 4-year-old soccer game and I'm yelling my advice as a dad onto the field, does it really help his team very much? Probably not. But here's what it does. I believe that there's a power in being present there. And there would be a power to being absent there. And sometimes just present changes things. Doesn't mean that the game is easier. It doesn't mean that the performance, that they don't have any nerves, but it lets people know I'm present with you. And in a similar way that us being present to other people is powerful, God being present to us can have an even more transformative power in our lives. Watch this though. It's a good word, but watch how the disciples respond. Okay, how do they receive this? Well, remember, in their defense, they are exhausted, stuck, scared, and when out of the storm, in these flashes of lightning, they see this figure approaching them on the water. They don't cry out, "Lord, save us." They cry out, "Un fantasma," a ghost. They're terrified. Now, is their reaction shaped too much by the stories and myths that they'd heard about ghosts on the water in their day? I cannot say. But as someone who has personally seen my guide in a frightening situation disappear into the fog ahead of me, as my cousin Jasmine did many years ago, I can sympathize a bit with them in this situation. Here's what the moment illustrates in the text. As Jesus followers, or humans in general, you might not be a Jesus follower yet, that's fine. Just as humans in general, we need to remember that we often misunderstand and mistake and generally miss out on God's presence in our lives, especially when we are in difficult circumstances. Here's how the story ends. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And he got into the boat with them and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, that earlier meal. So Mark is doing something here, but their hearts were hardened. Now, notice that the calming of the storm itself is not very dramatic, is it? It's just immediate. It's instantaneous. It's almost anticlimactic. Just Jesus' presence in the boat changes the situation that none of their efforts could. And I just want to pause here because I want to remind Brother Stan, who heard me preaching this earlier, that here's the thing. that there are some situations where all of our efforts combined will leave us tired and frustrated and stuck, and if we just recognize Jesus' presence with us, it would change the situation. Jesus' presence outweighs all of our presence, and it's not even close. And the way that I can be most present to my life and to the lives of other people and to my city and to my neighbors and to my kids' generation is when I remember that God is present to me. Because then I don't expect so much out of everybody else around me because I already know I have what I need because I'm connected to God, and so I'm able to be present to other people. God's presence outweighs all of our efforts every time. Our hope this morning is not in our technology, clearly. Our hope is not in worship, music. The hope is not in a young preacher, evidently. Hope is not in what's happening in children's ministry, evidently. Our hope is in the presence of Jesus meeting us here. So as we head into a time of communion, I do want to point this out. I'll go back just a little bit because I want you to get this if you're a Bible student. That the writer of the story, Mark, adds this comment that it is incredible that the disciples are confused by what's going on and have their hearts hardened to the presence of God in Jesus because their bellies are still digesting the miraculous lunch they just had hours before. So he's sort of roasting them. He's saying, you guys just saw this guy do something miraculous and you're scared a few hours later. But so often that's us. We do the same thing. God meets us and then we're scared again. And this is normal. God comes to us. But as we head into a time of communion near the end of our service, I want you to hear Jesus' words to you in your fears. Take heart. Calm and say, it is I. Soy yo. Do not be afraid. No tengan miedo. Where do you need to hear Christ's words to calm your heart? Where do you need to remember that it's not all up to you because Jesus is who he is? Where do you need to trust that God is not only present to you, but he is going ahead of you even as you struggle and feel stalled in life? Where are you afraid? What are you waking up thinking about? I understand it's really easy to say, I'm not afraid of this or that. I'm not afraid of roller coasters or ghosts or any of this stuff. I'm like, okay, but what are you afraid of? And what would Jesus say to that part of you? What do you need to hear from the wave-walking, storm-calming, crowd-feeding voice of Jesus who shows up to us in the storm and goes before us to say, do not be afraid? In communion, those of us who are followers of Jesus, who have said in some way that Jesus is greater than we are, that Jesus is the Lord of my life, even as I struggle to make such progress and slow progress in life, we gather to remember that Jesus is nevertheless present to us